to the 20th Century Semester 2 Remote Learning 2.0 podcast. We're fast approaching the midway point of remote learning. Hope you guys are having a wonderful time being off campus, etc., etc. All right, so we have been looking at time from 1945. We're looking at how the world recalibrated itself after the Second World War. We've had a look at the 1950s, had a brief look at McCarthyism. We kind of take a bit of a speedy look through the 50s. Have a quick squiz, if you like, at the Korean War. And we find ourselves now in the swinging 60s. And this is where things really start to heat up. So the Cold War, I suppose, relations freeze between the main players. And we have some new kids on the block. So we have Stalin, who has kicked the bucket, and in his place we have Khrushchev. And then we have a newly elected president of the USA, one JFK. So we are going to head now to the 60s. Now there's two fronts. We have, on the one hand, or the one front, we have Berlin. It's becoming a little bit of a microcosm of what's happening in the world. We have East versus West, but we're starting to get a few more issues. We've had Czechoslovakia, we've had Hungary having a bit of a crack. So there's a few rumblings, if you like, in the USSR. And they're starting to find that, East and West neighbouring, and particularly in Berlin. So if we remember with Berlin, it's its own special territory. It's about 110 miles into East Germany. So the Soviets really viewed West Berlin kind of as what they called a hole inside the Iron Curtain. And what they kind of thought was that the Western powers were able to get into the East and it was almost like they could spy into what was happening. Okay, so if we sort of head back a bit, so the East German government, so that sort of ran between 1949 and 61. So obviously they were communist, and they had this very, what we could say, banal, bland leader called Walter Ulbricht, and he became basically more unpopular as time went by. Anyway, the East German economy obviously had really fallen behind West Germany. So there was a bit of pressure there. And so he decided that he would rely on what we'd call the Stasi. And that's basically like the equivalent of the German KGB, if you like, a bit like an army, to keep people into control. So we're starting to get more of a police state in East Germany. So after a while, people are starting to defect, or basically heading west. So we had about 2.19 million East Germans out of the population of 17.5 who were trying to get to West Germany. So this is in between 49 and 58, and the authorities tried to fortify a border between East and West. It was only about 850 k's, and they sort of had wire and fences and a few landmines just for good measure. So Berlin was basically a gap in the defence, if you like. So it was a really good way for people to escape. So if you didn't like it, head to Berlin, jump over the border, basically to your freedom. So to make matters worse, basically the people who were defecting were young people and generally the more educated people, and a lot of skilled workers. Okay, so between 1958 and 59, we've got our new Russian leader, Khrushchev, and he suggested that Berlin sort of becomes a demilitarized city, okay, possibly under the control of the United Nations. And everyone in West Berlin was like, no way, mate. We love it here. The Western powers are great, and we're not going to be interfered with. So even though he was sort of suggesting to take that action, wasn't accepted, and then basically had to back down. not really good PR for him at the time. Okay, so to try and solve the problem, then Khrushchev tried to seal off Berlin, just like Stalin had tried to do in 1948. However, there was a Hungarian uprising in 1956, and he wasn't really certain how much he could rely upon his allies that was sort of set up in the Warsaw Pact, which was in 1955. So if we jump to 1960, and basically we have some peace conferences. So we've got Paris in 1960 and Vienna in 61. And this is where we have Khrushchev actually meets President Kennedy. And both of the meetings were basically organised to try and solve the Berlin issue. But they'd failed. Basically because there were bad relations between the two leaders. And again, it supports that theory that, the Cold War really was indicative of the personalities, if you like, who were in power on each side. So at the end of the Vienna conference, Khrushchev had demanded that there would be a solution for Berlin within 6 months. So when we get to sort of in May 1960, another aspect was a U-2 spy plane crisis. So when I say U-2, I'm not talking about the band. I'm talking about an actual spy plane, an American spy plane, and it was shot down by the USSR on the 1st of May. So by the 4th of May, Khrushchev announced it, and the USA actually claimed that the plane had actually been lost while studying the weather at high altitude. So anyway, Khrushchev produced the pilot and the wreckage of the plane, and it was clear that the US had been lying and were spying. So it was a little bit embarrassing, and it damaged the relations between the two. So if we sort of go into about 1958, the USSR actually claimed that the Western powers were using Berlin to spy on them. So this begins the whole, industry that the Cold War created of spying, intelligence, that sort of thing. So we were very much underway. There was phone tapping going on, all sorts of things. We had a lot of agents out in the field who would kind of, double agents and all sorts of things. Anything you think of in like a James Bond kind of inspired film. That, it does glamorize it a bit. Maybe a bit more John le Carre, might be a little bit more realistic. Okay, anyway, so we get to 1961, and obviously Kennedy has been elected. He's the youngest president the US has ever had, and he's a little bit inexperienced. So this can play into a few little things. So in 1961, we have what we call the Bay of Pigs fiasco, and Kennedy basically provided US support to invade a communist country of Cuba by Cuban exiles who wanted basically the island to be capitalist again. And basically there was training equipment, vehicles, aircraft supplied, and the invasion was a complete disaster. Kennedy looked like a bit of a dork, and the US ended up looking quite weak. Now, if we remember that Cuba is quite close geographically, and prior to the communist revolution there, it was a holiday spot. For the US, the rich and well-to-do would pop over to Cuba and have a holiday. So it was quite an industrial capitalist kind of place until someone called Fidel buggered it all up. Okay, so between about 60 and 61, so we have that changeover in the USSR of power. So after Stalin died, basically Khrushchev said, how rubbish Stalin was, and he was trying to improve the USSR and all that sort of thing. So he was kind of, I suppose, to build favour with his people a little bit. Having said that, by about 1960, people had kind of seen through that, and he was really a bit weakened in his power. So both sides, but in the 60s, really increased military spending. It was like cha-ching, cha-ching. They wanted to make sure they were ready for war, just in case. So there was an awful lot going into missiles, aircraft, and obviously nuclear missiles. Okay, so we've got that sort of going on in that particular part of the world. So we have lots and lots of things happening at the same time. So in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be looking at two things. Firstly, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and looking at the building of the Berlin Wall. So these two things sort of work in lockstep, if you like, and we'll go into detail with each of those particular crises, and we'll have a look at how the Cold War, I suppose in the 60s it really, really hotted up. When we get to the 70s, it goes to the next level. So that's all we've got time for today. Next time, we'll have a bit of a chat about the Cuban Missile Crisis.